Good morning, church. Good to see everybody this morning. We are so thankful for your presence. We have visitors in our audience. Thank you for coming and being a part of our special day of friends and family. We appreciate you being a part of us today and worshiping God in what we believe to be in spirit and in truth. Now, we want you all to stay, and we're going to feed you. You know, you're at the last of the line now. But yeah, we want you to stay. We want to feed you. We want to get to spend some time with you and renew old acquaintances and be a part of maybe making some new acquaintances as well. But we hope that you'll stay. As a parting gift, everybody has to have parting gifts. There are several still Power for Todays that are left on the table in the back foyer. And as you leave, your parting gift is to pick one up if you don't have one, or if you'd like to give one to somebody else and there's still some out there, just feel free to pick them up and take one with you and share it if that is your desire as well. But we would like for all of those to be gone. So it is your duty as you walk out. If you don't pick one up, you got to come back next week and get it, because we don't want any more left. We also, Suzanne wrote a thank you note. We do appreciate this. Was greeted us last week, and I've thought for a whole week about this, about being here 5 years and being blessed to be here 5 years and appreciative of the fact of being here 5 years. And I told Suzanne one day as I was talking about it, because I kept talking about it every day, it seemed like this week. But one of the times that I was talking to her about it, I said, usually as you come to a new work, there are a few cards that you receive that said, we're so glad to see you come, and we're so glad that you're a part of our family. And I said, usually then the next cards you get from people are, we're so glad to see you go. I mean, we wish you well in your journey. But to be here 5 years, and I think I know who was responsible for that and all the cards, I do appreciate it very much and look forward to many years to come as well. So those of you that were a part of that and a part of those gifts, we do appreciate it very much. Friends, that we talk about, the ultimate of friends, Jesus Christ. Let me ask you this morning as we began. Children's Church. Oh, I'm supposed to announce Children's Church. Well, nobody told me that. If you have a small child that would like to go to Children's Church, Miss Michelle is providing that off in the side, and you are welcome to go. There'll be Miss Missy will take you if you want to go. He said he wanted to sleep. He wanted to. But we need to talk about friends. Let me ask you this question this morning. If you were to go about picking your friends, and you already do because you already have some, what do you look for in a friend? What are some of the characteristics, some of the traits that you might look for and have looked for in a friend? Maybe it's the idea of loyalty or commitment. Maybe when you're looking for a friend, you're looking for someone that you can trust. Someone that will always be there. Someone that will give you a shoulder to cry on in times of difficulty. Give you a hand to shake in times of rejoicing. Give you a hug when you need a hug. But also be open enough that they will share themselves with you as well. Maybe you're looking for a friend that just simply put you can rely upon. We all love friends. We all want to have friends, and we are all friendly. And we have different levels, right? You have those folks that you work with and call them your friends, but they're just pretty much your work buddies. You have those folks that are your neighbors, and you say, oh, yeah, they're my friends, and you talk to them about once a week or once a month. You have those friends that you talk to once a year, and you say, yeah, they're my friends, and you haven't seen them since last year this time. You have those individuals that you lean upon heavily and you talk to on a daily basis. Those are your friends. Those are your friends. Those are tight friends. Those are the ones that we really want to talk about this morning. But when we're looking for friends and asking for friends and seeking for individuals that will really basically just help us get through life, help us to move from day to day, because let's admit it, life is tough and being alone, being without friends is probably one of the hardest chores, tasks to get through. Why? Because God, oh, people, remember when he looked upon Adam in the Garden of Eden, he said, it is not good that man should be alone, so he made a helpmate. You say, well, that's marriage. Who's your best friend? Who's your best friend? We need friends, but the ultimate of friends is Jesus. And Jesus is our friend, and Jesus as our friend means a great deal. And there are many things that we could talk about, but I want us to talk about a few things with Jesus as our friend. Jesus as our friend, first of all, is one that loves us unconditionally. What is love? Well, love is beyond an attraction. You know, we are attracted to things and we'll say, well, we love them. You look at something, maybe you're in the store and you say, oh, I just love this. I just love that. That's an attraction you have. Love goes beyond attraction to an affection, to really, truly loving something. You know, now we can look at it this way. I love ice cream. I love chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream. And if you want to bring me some, I'll be glad to eat it for you. We talk about things, food, clothes, people. We talk about these are our friends. These are things that we love. But love really is more than that. And while we can talk about the different levels of love, we can talk about an erotic love, we can talk about a brotherly love, we can talk about agape love. But love really is, when you look at it, love is the desire for good for someone else. It's you want them to achieve. You want them to succeed. You want them to be at their best. You want them to be able to accomplish. You want them to get the trophy. You want what is best for them. That's love. A love, though, that we often have for others is conditional. I love you if. I love you if you do this. I love you if you do that. Jesus, though, reminds us of really what type of love we should have. In John, the 15th chapter, in the 13th verse, Jesus' greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for a friend. What are you willing to give me? What are you willing to give me? I'm willing to give you everything. Jesus said, I'm willing to give you my life. Not just something, not just time, not just money. I'm willing to give you my life. Why? Because I love you. That's really what love is, isn't it? But when you think about the love that Jesus has, it's an unconditional love, isn't it? It's not tied to things. It's not that reciprocal point of where it says, okay, now I'm only going to love you if you'll take out the garbage on Thursdays. I'm only going to love you if you clean up your room. That's not that type of love. Think about the love that Jesus had for his followers. In John the 13th chapter and verse 1, I believe that John there is writing a verse that talks about the love of Jesus for his disciples. And he says that he loved them to the end of time, the end of age. I want you to think about this. John 13, Jesus is in the last week of his life. Jesus is with his beloved apostles. Jesus loved them to the end. Who was there? Judas. Judas betrayed Jesus. But you know, as I got to thinking about this week, one of the things that hit me again in my studies was, do you remember when Judas brought the mob to Jesus to place that kiss upon his cheek in order to betray him? Do you remember how Jesus responded to him? Friend. You see, Jesus knew, even in John 13, Jesus knew that individual that he had chosen to be one of his beloved, to carry his message forth after he died, to be one of his inner circle, if you will, to be one of those that he walked with, he sat with, he journeyed with, to be that one. And yet he picked him because he loved him. And he loved him unconditionally. Peter would be another one, wouldn't he? Peter would be a great example of the unconditional love that Jesus had. Jesus chose Peter. And he would tell Peter before it actually happened, remember, that Peter would deny the Lord. You see, we look at Peter and we see the strong personality of Peter. And we see the dynamics of Peter, and we see the ability of Peter, and we see Peter even, especially when we get to the book of Acts, as a prime mover and shaker in the church. I mean, Peter had all sorts of talents and abilities. Peter was wonderful. Peter's like the rest of us. He had flaws. He made mistakes. He made poor choices. Remember, the Lord told him before the cock crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter said, nope, not me. I'm not going to do it. And he did. Later on, after Jesus is crucified, he comes forth out of the grave. As he's resurrected out of that grave, he's able to see different ones. And there is a time in which Jesus deals with Peter in John 21. And it's the story, remember, where Jesus is challenging Peter with the idea, do you love me? And we could get into all the Greek and all the specifications there that the conversation back and forth is going about Jesus saying, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, all of that. But here's the question. Peter, do you love me? The response, though, as we see it, is that Jesus loved him. You see, Jesus loved somebody that was willing to betray him, but Jesus also loved someone that was making the mistake of denying him. These are people, basically, these two are just examples of others that turned their back on Jesus, and yet Jesus loved them. He loved them unconditionally. No strings attached, no strings tied to the love that he had. You see, Paul was right. In Ephesians chapter 3, verse 17 and 18, that you may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the width and length and breadth, height of his love. That we may be able to come to, that we may be able to see the love that Christ has for us. That it has width, that it has breadth, that it has depth, that it has height, that it reaches to all ends. His love is unconditional. And so, truly, as Paul says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, 1 Corinthians 13. The love that Jesus has for us is a love that truly does extend to all ends. For he became sin, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God, 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 21. What a friend we have in Jesus, the ultimate of friends, who loves us and loves us unconditionally. Secondly, Jesus is a friend who's always present. You know, sometimes friends run out. We've got a few firemen here today, and I admire firemen because they run in when others run out. Policemen, same thing. They run in when others run out. That's what they need to do, yes, but that's what they volunteered to do in order to be trained in order to do it. Sometimes friends run out, don't they? You see, go back for just a second to the story of Peter. Peter was put to the test, I wouldn't say severely. His arm was not twisted. No one was holding a gun to his head. No one was threatening to crucify him. And yet, Peter ran out. Peter denied the Lord. He gave in to the peer pressure that was there at the time. Jesus, though, as we find out, is always present. He fills, according to Ephesians chapter 1, verse 23, In him is the fullness thereof. Just not the fullness, but he's the one that sticks with us. Now think about it. It's a friend that loves at all times and a brother that's born for adversity. Isn't that what Paul, or rather what Solomon wrote in Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 17? A friend loves at all times. A friend runs in when the fire is on. A friend runs in when there's difficulty in life. A friend runs in when there's heartache and hurt. A friend is there with a shoulder. A friend is there with a hand. A friend is there with a hug. A friend is there. They may have to give up. They may have to sacrifice. But they've done it because they love us. And so they're present there for us. And they're with us through thick or thin, not just through the good times, but also through the bad times. They're always there. Jesus talked about those that God had given to him in John 17. And he makes the statement in verse 12. He says, those that you've given to me, he says, I've kept them. I've held them all except for the son of perdition. You see, I'm with them. I've held them and I've been able to hold them and probably, no. The answer is that he held them because they also held to him. Jesus was there with them. How important is that? We'll think about for a minute. In Matthew chapter 1, verse 23, the angel of the Lord comes to Joseph. And he tells him that he and Mary are going to have a son. And he goes back, the angel of the Lord goes back, and what he does is he quotes the Old Testament prophet Isaiah. And he quotes him with regards to a virgin shall conceive, bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel, which being translated is God with us. Now I want you to think about that for just a second. Jesus has not been born. The promise is that he is about to be born, but you're going to name his name Emmanuel, God with us. Well, you might say, well, preacher, that proves the deity of Jesus Christ. That proves that he was the Son of God. And the answer is true. But I want you to key on the last two words, with us. He's with us. You might say, well, sure, he was with them. He walked the face of the earth with them. For 3 years, he was in his public ministry. 30 years before, he was with them, just walking and being, if you will, someone that was much like everybody else. But for 3 years, he was out in front of everybody. He was the one talking. He was the one teaching the lessons. He was the one healing the lame and making the blind to see. He was the one that was so focused upon people. And sure, he was with them, but keep reading the book of Matthew. In Matthew 28, Jesus has done all of these things. He's lived his life. He's been crucified. He is resurrected. He is about to ascend to the Father in heaven. And do you remember his promise in Matthew 28, verse 20? Lo, I am with you always. How long is always? Always is always, isn't it? Even to the end of the age or the end of time, some have said, in the world. Jesus is always present. That can be both frightening and reassuring, can't it? It can be frightening from the standpoint of, does that mean Jesus sees me when I do things wrong? Jesus see what I do when in my shortcomings and in my failures? Does Jesus see me not only in my failures, but does he see me when I am not at my best? Does he see me when I don't have my makeup on? Not literally, but proverbially. Does Jesus see me in those times? And the answer is yes. Well, is he present when the good things are going on? Yes. You know, sidelight for just a second. We're often quick to praise God when blessings come, and we should. Absolutely, 100%. But when problems come, we should also praise God, for they're sharpening us up. Iron sharpens iron, doesn't it? Friend does the same. Jesus, always present, keeps us sharp. You see, the Hebrew writer reminds us in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, that we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities. All points, he's tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Now, why is that so important? Well, that high priest there in Hebrews chapter 4 is Jesus. Jesus, as our friend, has gone through it all. He's experienced everything we experience. You see, you ever been slandered? People talk about you? Well, if you say no, you don't know what they've said behind your back. You've probably been slandered. We probably all have at one time or another. Jesus was slandered. You may have been accused of something that you never did do. Jesus was accused of being a blasphemer. He was not. Jesus realized that upon his shoulders probably more weight than any of us have ever carried, for he had the weight of the world as he had to die for all of mankind. While we have the weight of what we believe the world to be upon our shoulders at times, we understand that Jesus, the weight he carried was far, far greater. We understand that Jesus had those crises in life. Jesus went through those difficult times. And so Paul, or rather the Hebrew writer says that he's an individual that understands what we're going through. No matter the heartache, no matter the hurt, no matter the crush, no matter the difficulties, no matter what you've gone through, good or bad, celebratory or deep, dark, ugly, Jesus understands. And he's there with us. He's present to behold us. Why? Because he's with us always. What does that mean to us? Well, it means that as Paul would write to Timothy, in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 16, he says that my first answer, no man stood with me, but all men forsook me. He said, I don't want that to be laid to their charge. Nevertheless, the Lord stood with me. Now, I want you to think for just a second with me. In 2 Timothy, Paul is at the end of his life. It's the last book we believe Paul penned. It's about 68 AD. Paul really, as he says just a few verses earlier, says, I've run the race. I've kept the faith. All is finished. He knows his time is drawing near. And yet Paul says, I want you to know, Timothy, I want you to know this, that there was a time in which everybody forsook me, but the Lord stood with me. Dear friends, you're not alone. You've got a friend. You've got a friend in Jesus. And so there's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. Jesus, as our friend, is always present. Then thirdly, Jesus, as our friend, speaks the truth to us in love. Now, all of that's true. He speaks the truth, and he speaks the truth in love. We realize, according to Proverbs 27 and verse 5, that open rebuke is better than love concealed or carefully concealed. Open rebuke is better than love carefully concealed. Why is that so important? Well, basically, Solomon in his wisdom is trying to tell us that, we need to tell people the truth. And we don't need to hide it. We need to tell them the truth. But now, I want you to notice, as we are going to talk about this point for just a few minutes, that it says, speak the truth in love. I've been married for, let me stop and think. I'll be married for 41 years in July. Head stop. I'm sorry, my math's slow. 41 years in July. My math may be slow, but my intelligence is still strong. When my wife says, how do I look in this? Yeah. I'm going to tell her she looks beautiful because she does. I'm going to speak the truth in love. Every once in a while, though, she'll say, especially when she hasn't bought it yet, and I still have freedom there. Now look, not your color, not your style. Friends tell friends the truth. Friends speak to others the truth. Now, Jesus was well qualified. Why? Well, you could look at Nathaniel, you could look at Nicodemus, you could look at the certain of disciples in the book of John, and what you find is that they refer to Jesus as rabbi. Now, we can't make too much of that discussion, but rabbi is Jewish for master teacher. They saw Jesus as the master teacher. And so what he said, they deemed as true and right. Well, as friends tell each other the truth, as we speak the truth and we speak it in love, we understand that the master teacher, you see, they were astonished at Jesus' teaching, weren't they, in Matthew 7? You remember there is the Sermon on the Mount, that beautiful sermon. Starts out the Beatitudes, blessed are the, talks about, then moves to influence. It then talks about in the 5th chapter, it talks about you've heard that has been said, but I say unto you, where they had messed up part of the law. They had changed things and they had twisted some of their interpretations of things, and Jesus straightened them out. And then he told them in the 6th chapter, he basically said, don't be a hypocrite. He talks about those that were giving and those that were praying in order to be seen of men. And he says, don't do that. And then he gets to a real practical part in Matthew chapter 6, and he says, don't worry, be happy. Only to the 7th chapter, he tells us don't judge, but he tells us to ask and seek, knowing that when we knock, it'll be open. Ultimately telling us that there's an end. And so we're to be the wise men that build our house upon Jesus, and not the foolish that build our house upon the philosophies and ideas of the world. Jesus told those folks the truth. And that makes sense, doesn't it? In John 1, before Jesus hits this world, so to speak, we know that it was told that the Son of God would come and that he would take upon flesh. And then in verse 14, it says that this word became flesh and dwelt among us. In John's discussion of Jesus, he says that the law came by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. And so in John 17, verse 17, when Jesus is praying, he says, sanctify them, he's talking to God the Father, through truth. Your word is truth, which who brought? Jesus brought. Why is that so important? It's important because it tells us what Jesus says we need to pay attention to. Now, I know there are people today that say, I only read the red sections of my Bible. I only read those sections where the writing is in red. No. Read all that Bible, but read especially the New Testament, understanding that we're bound under all of it, for it is the teachings of the Lord. But when you do, you're going to find out that there are some things in it that you're not going to like. There's some things in it that you're going to say, well, I just don't believe that. Well, you better. The Lord said it. There are things that you're going to say, I like that. Well, the reason is, because you're doing that. There's going to be some things that you're going to say, man, that's hard. I just can't, I don't know that I can do that. There are going to be times in which you're going to say, okay, I believe I can do that. I need to improve. I need to grow on it. But I'm getting there. In John the 6th chapter, Jesus challenged those individuals to whom he was talking and to whom he was preaching. And he told them, except you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood. And you might say, well, that's the institution of the Lord's Supper. I don't think so. I think that was a commitment that he was talking about, giving your whole self to the Lord. And there were those then that walked away. And Jesus asked Peter, he says, well, are you going away also? Lord, to whom shall we go? For you have the words of life. That was the whole goal of Jesus, wasn't it? But Jesus went to the synagogue the first time that we have recorded in Luke, the 4th chapter. There was part of a scroll that was given to him, and as part of the service there was a scripture reading. In the scripture reading, Jesus found the place in the scroll from Isaiah in which it says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor." Now we could talk about the recovering the sight, the blind, to set at liberty those that are captive, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. But notice what he says in the beginning. He sent me to preach the gospel. And Jesus, when he finishes that, he closes up the scroll and he sets it aside and he says, "This has been fulfilled in your hearing." See, that was his whole purpose, to show others how to go home to heaven above. Now, while he served as a lot of different things in a lot of different places, Jesus' true ambition was to show others how to go home. There was a preacher one time sitting in a meeting with elders and deacons, and one of the deacons espoused some things that weren't according to Scripture. And so the preacher the next day took it upon himself, and he went to this individual, went to this deacon, and he said, "Brother," he said, "we need to talk." And so they talked. And they talked, and when they got through, the preacher got in his car and went home. The wife of this individual that the preacher had gone to visit, the wife came to the preacher a few days later, and he said, I want you to know something. What's that? She said, "I asked my husband." She said, "Well, how did it go? How did the conversation go?" And he said, "Well, it went well." "Well, what do you feel? What do you think?" He said, "I think a friend came and talked to me to show me exactly what I needed to do." A true friend tells us the truth, but tells it in love. But then Jesus, as our ultimate friend, encourages and strengthens us. There's no doubt about it. Life's tough. There's no doubt about it. Life at its best has more potholes seemingly than good times. Now, that's not true. If you think about your life, you realize there's smooth sailing far more than there's rough seas. But you understand there's rough seas. And man, when they're rough because we're so used to the smooth sailing. But we need encouragement, don't we? A while ago, we talked about Jesus experiencing and the things that he experienced in his life. See, he knows. And whether it's a man with paralysis that Jesus would say before he healed him, "Be of good cheer," or it was the crowd, the apostles that were in the boat when Jesus came walking up at night, they were afraid. And Jesus told them, "Be of good cheer." Jesus understood the importance of encouraging others. Jesus' encouragement was not only with words. Jesus encouraged a leper. Leprosy in biblical times, as probably all of us know, was considered contagious, which they have decided that it's probably not. But that is contagious, and they were also basically feared and afraid of those individuals, and they would put them off in colonies. They would ostracize them from public because they didn't understand. Jesus came upon a leper, and before he healed him, what did the Bible say that he did? He touched him. Can you imagine? That man may have never had a touch, or maybe hadn't had a touch in a long time, years. He had been pushed out as an outcast, and Jesus touched him. That probably did more for that man than any word ever offered to him. See, sometimes in being a friend, we don't have to speak. Job's friends blew it. And they blew it when? When they spoke. We, being friends, sometimes all we need to do is just show up, put our arms around people, and tell them we love them. And what do we ultimately give them? The encouragement, the strength to continue on. The encouragement, the strength to go on. Jesus gives us encouragement today, doesn't he? He talks about the peace that he gives in John the 16th chapter and the 33rd verse. He talks about preparing a place for us in John 14 and verse 1. He talks about He came to give life in John chapter 10 and verse 10, and that he's the resurrection and the life, John 11, verse 25. Jesus still today is our friend, encourages us. And he encourages us by opening up the way to being our friend and saying, come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. What a great invitation. You see, he didn't say, well, you don't look right, you have the wrong color hair, you're the wrong age, you're the wrong occupation, you're this, you're that, the other. He says, come, let me be your friend. So this morning, if you need to respond to the Lord's invitation by becoming a New Testament child of God, by being buried with him, by baptism, rise up to be a new creature, or you need to rededicate your life, our prayer is that you'll make Jesus your friend. While together we stand and sing.